How does Michigan and Metro Detroit turn the corner on being the place people want to choose to build their lives? I'm Jairus Days, and on your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, May 29th, 2024, that's what we're talking about. We're being honest, there is no silver bullet here. We've been talking about this whole thing for many years, but there are interesting ideas and solid examples of what works. And it's not just throwing incentive money at the problem. It's about a more holistic approach and working together. Because despite what some people might think, we are not disconnected as a region and state. We are connected by economics, by our families, and by the eyes of the country and the world. Michigan and Metro Detroit has strengths, but also a lot of work to do. One of the more interesting developments to me on this has been the rise of the work of the Song Foundation. Their executive director is my guest today, and I hope you enjoy or at least learn something out of this conversation. But before we get started, a couple bills to pay. First, thanks to our members on Patreon. Without your listener support, local content like this is not possible. Join us as a member at patreon.com/dailydetroit. And Daily Detroit is brought to you in part by your Metro Detroit Best Choice Roofing. Whether it's time to replace your roof, repair it, inspect it, or get your gutter cleaned, Best Choice Roofing provides top-notch roofing services tailored to meet the unique needs of Detroit homes and businesses. They serve the region and inside the city of Detroit, too. Find out more at bestchoiceroofingdetroit.com. That's bestchoiceroofingdetroit.com, or call 313-474-7031. That's 313-474-7031. All right, from the Mackinac Policy Conference at the Grand Hotel on Mackinac Island, let's jump into this conversation. Joining me at the Grand Hotel at the Mackinac Policy Conference is Khalilah Burt Gaston. She is the founding executive director of the Song Foundation. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Khalilah, welcome to Daily Detroit. First timer, hopefully not last timer.
Yes. Happy to be here this morning. Thank you.
Absolutely. It is a busy conference up here. And one of the things I want to talk about is something that is related to your panel. I want to set the table a little bit, kind of tell people what's going on. But before we get into it, the topic is making Michigan a high growth, high wage state. This is something that is very important to our listeners, to be very honest with you. But before we get started, Khalilah, the Song Foundation, can we kind of set the table on what that is and the work you've been doing as kind of you've been out there in the last year? Because really made a splash, honestly.
Thank you. Yes, the Song Foundation is, I would say, our state and our region's newest foundation. We were founded in 2019 by Doug and Lynn Song. Many people know Doug from being a founder of Michigan's first unicorn, which was Duo Security, and he took his radical sabbatical and launched a family foundation. And so I came on board about 2.5 years ago and really have been helping to refine our strategy. And so we invest in emergent youth leadership, we invest in tech ecosystem building, and then our last area is around just supporting kind of community organizations and grassroots leaders and, seeing the types of communities that they want to live in. So that's our work. We launched formally and publicly last year, actually here at the Mackinac Policy Conference. And since then, we've been really busy grant making. So we've given nearly $2.5 million in the past year for a small foundation. That's, phenomenal. We're happy to be back here this year, sponsoring a session on Thursday with the Lieutenant Governor, as well as Victor Wang, who is the CEO of Right to Start, which is a national advocacy organization really supporting entrepreneurship across the country.
So the concept of making Michigan a high growth, high wage state, that is something that, you look at all this economic development that's been happening and the efforts in the last few years. And I feel like there are a lot of people, there's kind of two camps of people who think everything's fine and we can just keep on motoring along how things are. And then folks who realize that Michigan is in a much more competitive environment than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And there needs to be some adjustments to what Michigan does in order to succeed and pull together talent. So what is the hole that you're seeing right now?
Yeah. If we think back to the 1980s, Michigan was a leader nationally in the number of communities and residents who had higher incomes. And we've fallen drastically. So when you look at Ohio, when we look at Indiana, when we look at even Pennsylvania, they've kind of replaced and diversified their economy in a way that has attracted more kind of innovative companies, more companies that are, supporting talent and attracting talent. And we just haven't been able to keep up. And so I get it, right? My grandparents moved from the South, up north. Most of my grandparents and my aunts and uncles worked in factories, right? That was the job to have. But we've seen a loss in those types of manufacturing jobs. And now, automation, AI, even things that aren't related to advanced manufacturing, that's the wave. And we've got to do a better job of diversifying our economy.
So what are some of the key tent poles to doing that are different from what we did before?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, we have to invest in founders, tech founders, organizations that are looking to grow. They want communities that have affordable housing. They want transit. They want a pipeline of talent. It's not necessarily the same types of incentives, just tax breaks. We were talking offline about the Amazon HQ package. Michigan put together an incentive package of $4 billion. And they didn't come here, right? They went to Virginia, which had less kind of incentives, but more investments in affordable housing, more investments in transit, and more investments in the educational system, guaranteeing, right, the types of workers and employees that they needed in the future.
Well, and maybe this is just my business background or my former corporate background speaking, but if you're only selling on price and how much incentive you can throw on someone, you're always going to be at the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
Because it's not about a value proposition, right? It's not about what can we add, plus it's how much we can give away.
That's right. And we know those tax breaks, I'm an urban planner by training, and we have a lot of community activists and community leaders recently who've been really outspoken, right, about the tax incentives that go to larger corporations. And so it's a win-win, right? If we're able to attract companies that are paying high wages and we don't have to give as many tax breaks, right, we can then reuse that money in its rightful places, into education, into transit, into affordable housing. So, and look, we have a number of startups throughout our state. We do a good job in some ways of telling that story, but there's companies all across our state in the UP that are doing wonderful work in mid-Michigan on the west side of the state, and then also in Detroit. And so we have to kind of shift our focus, and this is hard for Michigan, from large corporations to those entrepreneurs who are building the next large corporations.
That leads me to think of this frequency mismatch that I feel like is out there where, you talk to people who are younger who want to do things in Michigan, and they get really frustrated because they feel like leadership, and this is a broad brush, and it's not everyone, and I apologize for a broad brush, but I think it's true that it's like, oh, well, automotive, oh, with this, oh, like whatever the big three. And it's not as much of, oh, technology, or, oh, we're going to grow these things here. It's how do we double down on what we already have, as opposed to how do we grow new things?
Yeah. And, I don't even know where it starts. My oldest is 13 years old, right? And she loves Michigan. She loves the outdoors. But, as we've been talking about my work, she said, Mama, Michigan is like watching a dinosaur become extinct. And it was like a dagger in my heart.
Oh.
I thought, she's only 13, right? Where does she get this message, right, that Michigan isn't the place for her to be in the future? And so we've been trying to unpack that. But, you're right. We're losing a lot of, talent, but then we're not necessarily supporting the talent that remains. Yesterday we showed a film, and then, Doug was engaging in a conversation with Senator McMorrow, and it was about Darren Riley. Darren is from Houston, Texas. He got his degree at Carnegie Mellon, and he moved to Detroit, and he's building a company called Just Air. He has contracts all over the country, but he's pretty much operated in complete anonymity, right, before this. And now people have seen him kind of in the conversation with the president, but before that, people didn't really know about his company.
Well, and I've heard actually from a number of my friends about his company, and I do think it should get a lot more publicity, because that's the kind of stuff where it's like visionary, in that we're going to do something that actually not only like is a company, but also actually makes change in the world.
Yeah.
And I think generations today, that's how they feel. They want to make change. They want to do something with their job. They want to have life-work balance. And for me, I find it odd, frustrating. I'm not sure what the word is, but like I'm in my early 40s.
Yeah.
And I feel often that like I am still the youngest guy in the room, yet everybody I know like has houses and kids and stuff. You know what I mean? Like it feels like there needs to be like more of a push towards leadership. Not that older voices don't belong at the table, they do, but like when we see a plan for 2050, I'm going to be here for it.
Yes,
right.
yes.
And I think about that, and I think about the frustration of some younger people that I have heard where they see a plan, say, for 2050, and they go, yeah, but I'm making decisions for 5 years from now.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to build a house. I'm going to build a life. Get some urgency instead of having a series of 4-year plans.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, we can't wait. I think it's difficult. I was talking to another leader, and they were saying that their average age for their board members is 78, right? So that speaks to to what you just mentioned. And I mean, we've got a lot of work to do, but I think what we do have, right, are a lot of assets that we need to build upon. There's a lot of work being done in the UP in Northern Michigan around rec tech. And sometimes we look at our state and we see the negatives, but there's a company, a startup up north that is cleaning space, literally cleaning space. They have contracts with NASA. They're recruiting people from Texas, right? Because the weather is more, moderate. It's a wonderful 365 if you're into the outdoors. And I was completely blown away. Like, weather hasn't been a deterrent for you. And they said, no, right? We're attracting people up here who like to ski, who like to, be on their four-wheelers. Like, it's a perfect climate for the type of individuals that they're recruiting.
Well, it's not just the Southwest that's growing. And I think, to me, and this is maybe an unpopular opinion, I think the idea of, you can't compete with the weather, I think that's a cop-out. Yeah. I think that if you've got the interesting place to be, if you've got things happening, if you've got opportunities, sure, some people, the weather, absolutely. But when I hear people, it's just not 80 degrees all the time, I feel like that's a cop-out that they just don't want to do the work. Yeah. I'm serious, because if you go to cities like Columbus or Indianapolis, or even like people will slag on Chicago's still hopping and doing things. Like, there's so many things that are busy and active that are not. Like, if weather was a thing, Chicago would be 200,000 people, right?
That's right, yeah. It's a shift in culture. It's a shift in mindset, right? And the thing that I've learned in the past 2 years, look, I'm non-technical. I didn't have any background in tech before I started leading this foundation. And what I've seen is that really tech and innovation has a high tolerance for risk. Right? It's about failing, about picking yourself up. I've met some founders, they're on their third startup. Right? But they feel like what I've learned in the past is going to help me be successful in the future. And we have to adopt that mindset, right, as a state and in our own regions. And look, we're not going to be Silicon Valley. We're not going to be Austin. When we look at our founders, there was a report done about a year ago. They said Michigan founders, by and large, are older. They come from business backgrounds connected to the automotive industry, and they care. Right? They care not just about making money and being successful personally, but they care about the broader community, and they want to make a difference. And those are the types of founders that we need to invest in.
I personally agree. So what are some of the things that you would like to see, or the foundation would like to see, or conversations that you'd like to have to push this agenda forward to help make this transfer, right? And help build that risk for tolerance? Because, I think about growing up, my family, all like union guys and gals. Like, you go to the factory, you work at the factory, it's nice and steady. Like, that's, I think, where some of that lack of risk tolerance goes into, right? You grow up with it, where it's like, oh, you're working over at Chrysler's? It's Ford's, Chrysler's. That's right. And you're set. And like, I still get that conversation from older family members. Why? I can't believe you left corporate.
Gosh, when I left Indiana, I'm from central Indiana. When I left Indiana in 1994, my grandparents wanted me to work in the factory. And my grandparents, I had one grandfather who retired early from Chrysler, and he was offended that I didn't want to work in the factory. Both sets of grandparents. So I understand, that automotive legacy. I understand what it means to families. My grandparents, my aunt and uncles were able to raise families, have an upper middle class status, go on vacation, buy homes. So I get what the automotive industry has done for the middle class, especially the Black middle class. But now it's time, right, to figure out, how do we create the next middle class, right? How do we create good paying jobs in the future for everyone? And so when you talk about what we want to see, the first thing I think is we need a comprehensive vision and an agreement that we do need to diversify our economy. I mean, that's the first thing. To your point earlier, I'm not sure everybody actually gets it, right? A lot of people are wanting to replace and bring back the jobs that we've had. I think the second thing is we do have to really bridge the gap between traditional economic development and the type of economic development that attracts and retains startups. It's totally different, right? It's not based on incentive packages and tax breaks per se, but it's mostly based on, do founders see, right, the type of culture and the type of community that they want to build a company in. So things like public education, higher education, transit, for God's sake, right?
Well, and that's a hot topic in itself, because we'll talk about transit and there'll be people like, I'm not sure we need that. And in my mind, I'm like, that's one of the foundational blocks. Why do you think it's a foundational block?
I mean, if you think about it, and I've been reading a lot over the past year. It's related in some ways to climate change, right? Like gas is bad. I mean, it is, right? And so we've done an insurmountable amount of damage to our universe. And so we've got to figure out, how to make that just transition. It's also about convenience, right? We live right outside of downtown. Before we had some shifts in education for our daughter, our commutes were like 5 minutes. Right, it's just a better quality of life, right? And I know, again, that's a dagger in the heart of the Motor City, because we, definitely, put highways on the map. But, I think the NFL draft was another wonderful example, right? We had people here from all over the world, and there was a lot of traffic jams, right? Uber wasn't as reliable. You still had to walk places, but it felt like a city. I walked from Corktown downtown, and I was like, if I was in New York or Chicago, right, that wouldn't have been a thing. But my husband was like, well, what are you doing? I was like, I
did that walk too. People were like, what are you? I was online with it. And they're like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just walking.
Right.
It's like in
like
Brooklyn or
right.
Chicago, you're just walking.
That's
like,
right.
Just what you do. Because I went from like the Growing Together Michigan event.
Oh yeah.
Down to back to the draft zone,
That's
if you will. And it's actually not a bad walk at all, but it's about that shift of like, and wouldn't it be great if there was an easy, reliable way to always just pick up something to come back there, to connect these things. And I think about that in the future of Detroit, because look, we've lost a lot of population in the city of Detroit.
Yeah.
You look at some place like Columbus, it seems like they found who we lost, right? They're over 900,000, coming up on 1 million people.
That's right.
There are ways that you can connect these things with transit, with streetscapes, with design, to be like, hey, this is a place that you want to be. And maybe we don't always, not to hate on anyone, but like the idea being like, we don't always have to build out at like, 24,000 mile road.
Yeah. And look, the reality is as well, Lynn Song, our co-founder, was on a panel yesterday with Mayor Duggan and Amy Hovey talking about affordable housing. So Michigan also is one of the most expensive places to live. Why? Just because
really?
We don't have...
I think that's against common wisdom.
Oh, right. We don't have enough housing stock. Right. And so when you don't have enough supply, prices go up. Childcare, Michigan, again, is one of the most expensive places for childcare. So when we're losing people to Columbus or we're losing people to Florida, a lot of it is because, one, they can find a higher paying job. And in some ways, it's less expensive, right? So you're putting more money in their pockets. We did an innovation roadshow and took about 50 leaders to Indianapolis and to Columbus, Ohio. And you're right. I was completely shocked as a former Hoosier that people are moving to Indiana. It's like, wake up, Khalilah. We met a young woman who is from Grand Rapids, and she and her boyfriend relocated to Indianapolis. They're in the tech field. We said, how did you get here? And she was like, I was recruited, right, to come to Indy. And so we were like Exhibit A and B. And then Columbus has just done a lot of innovative things. They have, of course, more resources that they've allocated to this. But I think what they've also done is really come up with a coordinated economic development strategy. So, the C's there, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Cleveland, their main goal is how do we bring these companies to Ohio first and foremost.
It's not that long ago that I remember under a different administration, Oakland County going out and pitching themselves completely separately from the rest of the region.
Yeah, and that's not going to get us where we need to be. The federal government had a tech hub application process, and Michigan, I think, submitted 4 or 5 applications, right? There was an application from Metro Detroit, there was one from Lansing, there's one from the west side of the state, and then there was one from up north. And I just, and look, we didn't get the tech hub application in southeastern Michigan. We did get a planning grant in Lansing, but you can't tell me that a state submitting 5 applications is going to be as competitive, right, as one application from a state. Or what we also saw is that multiple states came together to submit applications, right? So we've got to learn. I used to say that true collaboration was the most innovative thing we could do as a state. And I think that kind of harkens to that. We are kind of cannibalizing our own efforts.
I think if there's a saying that if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so that makes me think, you're talking about collaboration, everything else. I feel like some of this question isn't just policy, but cultural. So how do we push that cultural lever a bit where it's like, okay, you get rewarded for cooperating. You get rewarded for seeing these wins and everything. Because to me, you can have all the best strategy in the world, you can have all the tactics, but like culture eats all of that for lunch. That's every right. time, 100%.
Yeah, it's that's really difficult. When we were in Indianapolis and we asked them, what did they do to really kind of start and shift this momentum in their city and in their state? And they said, a lot of times people come together in this work or any sort of like large scale initiative, and the first thing they think of is, oh yeah, I do that. Or, oh, we do that better than they do. Or, oh, we should be doing more of this. Just give us money and we can do more of what we're already doing. And they said the pivotal question that they asked themselves in Indianapolis was, what can we stop doing as leaders and as organizations that's going to move us forward? And for me, that was really mind-boggling. And I was like, okay, that was a drop the mic moment. Did we get it? And I don't think we did. Right? I don't think the leaders there understood that maybe for us to move better, you've got to do less, right, of something in order for us collectively to move forward. And it's this piece around the difference between cooperation and competition, right? I'm a competitor. I'm a former athlete. So I do love competition, but sometimes in order to compete more collectively, you've got to cooperate, right? It's that tension between having a team where, someone is trying to take your spot, but at the end of the day, we all want to win, right? So you've got to try to minimize, right, that kind of sheer desire to be number one, because collectively we can be better together.
I mean, there is that collective like wanting to be, there is that number one, but I also wonder, is there also like kind of the idea of like, if the pie is shrinking, I have to grab mine, as opposed to a growth mindset of the pie is growing, so I'm going to do what I do best and the others do the rest.
Or our pie is getting smaller, right? So that's the reality. It's not like we're going after.
Khalilah, did you take my pie?
Hey, our pie as a state is getting smaller. And so if we want to continue arguing over crumbs, okay, right? But what we should be doing is saying, how can we get a bigger piece of the pie that Columbus is getting, or make more pie, or innovate a new pie.
Well,
right?
And the thing is about incentives, circling this whole conversation back, is that you don't make more pie with less ingredients.
Yeah.
And I feel like we keep trying to make more pie with less stuff, and then you just get with like crappier and crappier pie, because nobody wants a pie with no fruit in it.
I love that. Make more pie. Right. Yeah. That's what this is all about. And that's the shift. As long as we continue to argue and fight over crumbs, to your point, that has us in a scarcity mindset versus saying, what is the next Ford, right? And not that we, don't appreciate Ford and don't see all the contributions they made to our state, but we got to be thinking, what is our economic base for our state and for our cities and for our region in the next 50, 75, 100, 150 years, right? That's the type of transformational leadership that we need at this point.
Well, I spoke recently at a Mish Auto event, and I was like, we really need to focus on, and this is a bit editorializing, and I apologize, but like, we need to focus on planting trees for whose shade we will never sit under. It's generational thought as opposed to worrying about the next quarter, or if your part price is going to get squeezed as a supplier or whatever. It's that longer term thinking.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why younger generations are like, screw you. Right? Because they don't feel like we are being stewards of their lives, right? We're the decision makers currently. And in some ways, they're looking to us saying, like, the decisions that you're making are only based on your interests, right? And you're not stewarding, right, the world. You're not stewarding the region. You're not stewarding these opportunities in a way to give us something that we want to inherit. Right now, you know, young people are like, let's tear this down and start anew. And, you know, that's I think it's rough. And it creates a lot of, I think, sometimes contempt between younger generations and older. And then, you know, I'm a Gen Xer too, and we're like crunched in the middle. Right?
Yeah. Well, Khalilah Burt Gaston, I really appreciate your time. Now, if people want to know more about the Song Foundation, get involved, you know, all the things, where can they go? What can they do?
Yeah, so they can visit us first at song.foundation. So there's no .org, .com. It's literally song.foundation. There on our website, we have a little form. It takes like 3 minutes to complete. Just introduce yourself. You can also send us an email at info@song.foundation. We'd love to hear from you. Definitely like and follow us on X and on Instagram, and message us. Let us know, you know, your thoughts, your opinions about what Michigan needs to do to diversify its economy and be more competitive.
Thank you so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. Don't forget to leave 5 stars on your favorite podcast app. And if you have feedback, dailydetroit@gmail.com, or stop by Daily Detroit on Threads or Instagram. From the Mackinac Policy Conference, I am Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and we'll talk tomorrow.